You know, we also know from the documentation provided by one of the rig maintenance managers, I think it was a guy called Jimmy Harrell, who said that he overheard Donald Vedrine on the phone saying, "It's fucking blown, it's blown, are you fucking happy now?" Who was he talking to? We don't know. We don't know who he was talking to. There's been some conjecture, but once again, it needs to go before the Gold Coast hearing. And they need to ask who he was speaking to. "Are you happy now?" suggests that some previous conversation had occurred where this possibility was alluded to. You know, this doesn't take rocket science. Now the reality is that these questions will never be asked anyway, even if the committee is given the power subpoena, because the hidden hierarchy will make sure that the committee is controlled. So beyond Phi Beta Kappa, then we get into, you know, the Shriners. Now Freemasonry in the US is far more open than it is here. You know, people wear their 32nd degree Freemason's belt buckle or their lapel badge, you know, with pride. Because when you see that somebody is wearing their 32nd degree, you know they're a good old boy. You know they're in the network. They're a safe pair of hands, they can be trusted. You'll see the Shriners pretty much almost any weekend in most American cities at various hotels having their conventions. They're normally wasted, and they're normally wearing the Moroccan fez, which is their badge of honour. And then below that we have the Freemasons. Well, Freemasonry in the US is far more widespread. It's estimated something like 10 million Freemasons in the US. But the way in which it's controlled is that at the local level, at the local lodge, it's just the blue degrees, the first, second and third degree. And of course at the local level it's primarily benign. I mean, it is just the businessman's group, you know, still probably swinging a few favours to amongst the brethren, but primarily it's just the local community. But once they go beyond the blue degrees, from that point they are invited, the best and the brightest are invited to go to state. And all initiations from the 4th through the 32nd degree are done at the state lodges, which of course gives the committee the opportunity to identify the people that they want to, you know, bring up through the ranks and bring into their inner sanctum. And the state lodges are incredible edifices. You know, they're normally they're open at various times during the year. I mean, I got the opportunity to visit the largest state lodge in the US, which is in Oklahoma. It's in a little town called Guthrie, Oklahoma. And the biggest building in the community is the temple. And Guthrie relies for a big chunk of the revenue for the town on all the Freemasons coming in from all over the state to go through their initiations at State Lodge. But this is the hidden hierarchy. And as like I said, I'm presenting this from personal experience because, you know, when I went over to work in the US, my task that I was given was to break up the good old boy network. And, you know, being a sort of young private, never having worked in the US, I said, yeah, sure, I can do that. It took me about 3 months to realise that I'd bitten off way more than I could chew here. And I was about to basically give up the ghost and say, hey, you know, this is not for me, I can't do this, you need somebody else. Because basically what would happen is that, you know, you'd go and visit, you meet with the managers in the various areas, you'd have a great dinner with them, you'd have a chat, you'd talk about business strategy, and they go, yeah, absolutely, totally agree with you, absolutely, yeah, consider it done. And as soon as you're on the plane, you know, I can picture them on the phone going, right, he's gone, lads, business as usual. Well, eventually, one of my team took pity on me, and he was a 32nd degree Freemason, and he explained the facts of life to me. And he basically said, you know, look, he said, I actually like some of the ideas that you're looking to introduce, and he said, I do agree that the old boy network, the good old boy network, is abused. And, you know, there are very good people who are bypassed in the organisation just because they're not part of the good old boy network. And he said, so, you know, we do need to change the balance. But he said, you're going to have to work with me if you want to do this. And so, you know, we formed a partnership. I mean, in the company hierarchy, you know, I was you know, his superior. But in the reality, I knew that I couldn't achieve anything without his support and commitment to work with the Good Old Boy Network. It was a hell of an education, and it's because of that experience that I was able to put this together. But of course, it goes way beyond this as well, because, you know, these are all the organisations, and I mean, this is ostensibly a chart pulled together by Dr. John Coleman, from his book, Committee of 300, which he wrote in 1986. Back in the days, John Coleman and Carroll Quigley, these were the academics researching the New World Order. And they were allowed to do what they wanted to do and write what they wanted to write with a fair degree of impunity, because nobody ever read their books, except other academics. Then, of course, come the internet and the networking. And as John Coleman said himself nearly 30 years ago, he said, these guys who perpetrate this agenda will always acknowledge that 13% of people, how he came up with the number I don't know, but it's his number, 13% of people will always know what's going on. And the challenge is to make sure that 13% never actually hook up with each other, and the 13% doesn't start to grow. Well, thanks to the internet, that 13% is growing. And these guys know it, and as you'll see in a little while, they've known it for a long time. Now in here, there's some organisations that, of course, that you will recognise. Obviously the Bilderbergers in Europe. Daniel Esterlin, who spoke at the Alternative View event earlier this year. Wonderful guy. A few weeks ago, Daniel Esterlin was over with Castro. Castro had read his book on the Bilderbergers, and Castro called Daniel, because Daniel lives in Spain, speaks Spanish. By the way, the only reason Daniel thinks he's alive is because he's a former member of the FSB. And Daniel actually shared with me, he said that the inside track in the FSB is that what hit the Pentagon was a rogue Russian missile, former Soviet missile, launched from a US submarine off the coast of America. So that if anything had come of it, and people had discovered that it was a missile, because we all know it was a missile, but if the generic awareness was that it was a missile, then they would blame it on somebody launching this old Russian missile. But he believes that the only reason he's still alive is because of his former contacts with in the FSB. Anyway, Castro was so impressed by the book and Daniel's forensic research into the Bilderbergers that he invited Daniel over to speak with him. So he was there, I think, about 2 months ago. And whilst they were talking, Castro said, Daniel, you've got to meet my friend Chavez. So he just picks up the phone and says, hey Chavez, I'm here talking with Esterlin. The guy who's written the book on the Bilderbergers. You need to talk with this guy. So Daniel, right now, is in Venezuela talking to Hugo Chavez. So these guys are starting to become aware. And of course, you know the one thing that all these rogue nations have in common, don't you? The rogue nations, Venezuela, Cuba, Libya, North Korea, Iran, they're all free of debt from the World Bank. They're all free of debt. Brazil, exactly. And Iceland now. That's why you're not reading anything about Iceland, because they don't want anybody to know what Iceland did and how Iceland got out of the mess. So these organisations are there to make sure that people are pulled in. So although they're not fraternities in the same way as Skull and Bones and Phi Beta Kappa, similar rules apply. And often they'll invite people to one meeting and one meeting alone, because once they're invited to one meeting, they've effectively signed the documentation to say that from that point forward, they will recognise the agenda of the organisation and they won't publicly challenge it. And of course, a couple of key ones: Trilateral Commission, founded by Zbigniew Brzezinski under the direction of David Rockefeller, ostensibly to support the presidential campaign of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter worked for Zbigniew Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, David Rockefeller. Once Obama threw his hat into the ring as the potential presidential candidate, I knew immediately who was going to become president. It wasn't rocket science. Zbigniew Brzezinski has mentored Obama for 27 years. There was no way that Brzezinski had mentored this guy and he wasn't going to get in the main job. Brzezinski must be wincing every time Obama gets up on the podium. And Brzezinski, as we'll see, is a very key player. So Obama works for Brzezinski, and Brzezinski, of course, is still working for Rockefeller. Then we have the Council on Foreign Relations, which of course everybody's familiar with. Prime organisation for establishing global policy. And once you're a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, you're a member for life. And there's a guy who is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations who, he and I hadn't really seen eye to eye for about 10 years. Matt Simmons. This guy's an investment banker in the oil industry, and he was one of the prime proponents of the peak oil mythology. And he latched onto it around about the turn of the century. And along with Matt Simmons and Mike Rupert, these were two of the prime movers for getting the whole construct of oil scarcity into people's consciousness. Because if you think something is scarce, then you'll pay more for it. You know, the fact of the matter is, and of course I talk about this in the peak oil myth or reality presentation, but the fact of the matter is that, I mean, we don't need to be using oil, period. But even if we do, then the technology exists. Every vehicle on the road could be returning over 100 miles per gallon. But there's two reasons why that technology is not available. One is we have an infrastructure that sucks out 90 million barrels of hydrocarbons a day, and we have to consume it. Second one is taxation. Taxation. Because that's why 70 plus pence of every litre bought at the pumps is tax. Because it's the most efficient way of clawing the wealth back from the people. And the third reason is that this is the way in which the global economy is established, by pumping petrodollars into the global arena, so that the oil producing companies have then got currency to spend on American products, which fundamentally is arms.